Hello everyone, welcome to a 2-hour course on the basics of corrosion for the oil and gas industry. Corrosion happens when there is a corrosion cell. A corrosion cell consists of anode which dissolves, cathode which accepts the electrons from the anode, electrical connection which actually supports the transport of these electrons from anode to cathode, the electrolyte which is the medium that promotes or provokes the corrosion of the anode, and the potential difference or the ability of the anode and the cathode to accept or reject electrons. When you have a single component, now as I mentioned before, the potential difference is the ability of an element to accept or reject electrons. Electrochemically, it is referred to as the electromotive force of that particular cell. Now very simply, it is how likely that particular element is to accept electrons or to reject electrons. Now one half cell consists of one electrode immersed in an electrolyte. So if we consider the example of just the anode shown in the previous slide, we can consider it to be the half cell which has been immersed in the electrolyte. Now the potential difference is the difference between the anode and the cathode. Now if suppose we have a single component, then the potential difference will be between this small area and this adjacent area. So the total cell potential is obtained using the Nernst equation. Now Nernst equation in general can give us the different cell potentials under non-ideal conditions or polarized conditions, such as those where you have different electrolyte mediums. So if suppose initially you have only NaCl, say 3% NaCl, then you have a certain cell potential. If you change this to say 5% sodium chloride, you will have a different cell potential. So that difference you can calculate using the Nernst equation. If you want a few bit more details on the Nernst equation, there is going to be a separate course only focused on the electrochemistry, and I will have solved problems for this equation in that course. For the purpose of this course, let us focus on what actually happens when we have this cell potential. So the electrode potential series gives us the potential of each element or each reaction with respect to the standard hydrogen electrode. Now the standard hydrogen electrode can be referred to as a scale. So if you want to calculate a thread length of a thread, you can use that scale to calculate. If instead of scale you decide to use a different thread, then the length will be variable and relative to that thread. So that is not universal. Because you want to have universal values, we use a scale. The standard hydrogen electrode is that scale which will give us the potentials for each element. Now it will for example, if we want to see how likely is zinc to corrode, then we will have the different potential of that zinc element. If you want the iron, we will have this. If we suppose want to see how likely the hydroxide formation reaction is going to be, it's going to be here. If we are going to this will be at pH 14. So if suppose the pH is now going to be neutral 7, then the reaction will have a different potential. So even when you have different potentials, you can calculate this quantity also using the Nernst equation if you really do not want to or are not able to do the measurements time and again. Now a bit about what the standard hydrogen electrode. A standard hydrogen electrode was constructed by scientists to be able to measure that that potential of that particular element. Now, in a standard hydrogen electrode, the two major conditions are that it should have a constant cell potential. So the potential of this particular electrode should not change. The next is the H plus concentration or the H2 concentration should also remain constant. So the reaction between H plus to H2 should be reversible. So they should go, irrespective of what happens at the other end, this reaction should go on reversibly. So these are the two conditions which actually have to be followed by each reference electrode. Now they selected hydrogen basically because it is the simplest element. So there's a transfer of just one electron, and the potential given to this was 0. So this is similar where in a particular scale we decide that this point is going to be 0, so that the rest can be absolute measurement. Similarly, the potential for this is 0. Nobody has actually seen or been able to count the potential, but that's why it is assumed to be 0 for convenience sake. So now here this is a platinum wire, this is the inlet for the hydrogen, and you have an acidic environment inside. So whenever you connect another element to this, if that element, for example as in previous case, if you connect Zn, then the Zn has a tendency to reject electrons, so that will be accepted here, and you will have the H plus, the H2 formation. So the H plus are going to be consumed, but they will be replaced by the incoming H2. If instead of Zn you decide to connect copper, then the copper has a tendency to accept electrons. So in this case H2 will dissociate into H plus, and that will be and those electrons will be consumed by copper, and the H2 this will be replaced by the acidic environment that is inside. Now such kind of changes ensure that this electrode will not change at all. So, similarly, the element will also not undergo a lot of change due to the reference electrode. So we are only going to measure the ability of that copper. So for example, Zn is quick to dissolve. So if we assume that you have a Zn element, then the electron, the Zn to Zn2 will happen fast. If we assume it to be Fe, it will happen slower. So if we connect Zn to Fe, then this potential difference is going to be slow. So that is at a higher or more positive potential. This is fast, so that is at a lower 0.7 potential. So that is how that this fast or slow is, that's a kind of way to understand the likeliness of that element to dissolve. Now this is a very delicate system, so it's more of a glass and inflammable hydrogen gas, so it's not possible to use everywhere. That's why people have designed other reference electrodes such as calomel, silver chloride, and copper sulfate, and these two usually are used in labs, and the copper sulfate is used in oil and gas industry for pipelines. So for this course, this is an especially important reference electrode. In this case, the reversible reaction occurs between copper and copper ions, and the outer covering is usually of plastic. There are copper sulfate crystals, and the solution is copper sulfate. So you will usually use these in the survey methods for cathodic protection as well. So for this particular course, it is important to actually remember the copper sulfate electrode. Now the chief reactions that occur in any corrosion consists of anodic and cathodic reactions. Anodic reaction is always a loss of electrons. Cathodic reactions, however, can be different. So they will depend on what is present in that particular electrolyte. If it is too acidic, usually you will have hydrogen evolution. If it is neutral, you will have a hydroxide formation because you will have dissolved oxygen. If it is acid plus dissolved oxygen, you will have the formation of water as well. If it has a chloride medium, such as in the marine environment, you can have chloride formation. So these kind of reactions will depend, and sometimes you can have two or more reactions occurring as well. So